Today, I want to talk about surrender. This channel is mostly about retrocession, the process I use to release myself from the hold of past incidents and traumas. But surrender is a big part of it that I don't really mention much. Anybody can try retrocession, whether in one on one sessions with me or in the forthcoming videos where we do retrocession on the channel. But behind it all is not magic of any kind, it's always about surrender. And so, one way to summarize what's happening in retrocession is we go back in time, we re experience the event that led to trauma, led to additional traumas, led to habits, led to the pain of life. We go back to that original incident, we experience it again, and then this is where the magic happens, the mystery of it. We reframe the experience. Now, I don't say that typically when it comes to retrocession, but here's the amazing thing, and this is part of why I have so much faith in retrocession as a process. Definitely worked for me. But does that really say anything? Because I have different experiences. I have a different life. I have different traumas. I'm always cautious about making pronouncements about retrocession based on my experience with it. I'm just a different person. But I've also worked with other people. And there's a couple things that all of those cases have in common. At least all the ones, there's one where nothing happened, but that person was unable to let go enough to even begin the process. They couldn't even relax. So that's a different case. But as far as everyone else goes, there's some things in common. Some of the things I'm not going to talk about, it's not a secret so much as I don't want, if somebody watching this video is going to come do retrocession, I don't want to plant any ideas in your head, but there's some things that happen during retrocession, involuntary movements and involuntary things that happen in people's bodies when they're going through retrocession. And I use that as a cue for when to take certain actions and give certain instructions. But the other piece of it that I will share is that invariably, and this usually happens out loud verbally, and again, I really do hesitate to say this because I don't tell people this before retrocession, but you know what? I'm going to say it anyway because I think it's important. Everybody that makes their way through the process, releases some trauma, releases the hold of some past experience on their present day life, every single one of them has this moment where most of the time verbally they say, oh, that wasn't what I thought. Or, oh, this, as an example, this person was doing the best they could. Or, oh, that wasn't my fault. I always thought it was my fault. There's this moment of realization that happens, and it's just giving me chills talking about it right now. It's amazing because it always happens, especially when people get really profound healing. And what that is this reframing of this prior situation. So that situation didn't change. It is what it is. It was in the past. The only thing we're carrying from that past event is the memory of it. And that memory is affecting us right now. It's not about the past, never has been. That past has nothing to do with it. It's about this present moment right now. So the past has this hold, and they reframe it, and they release. The reframing causes this amazing release. It's incredible. So what is that release? What is that reframing, I should say? To put it simply, that reframing that happens involuntarily. So if you're watching this video and eventually do retrocession, don't force it. Believe me, don't force it. But that reframing that happens involuntarily is the moment we surrender. So what are we surrendering? We might think of surrender as this thing that happens on a battlefield, putting up the white flag. In a sense, that's kind of what we're talking about. But what are we surrendering here? And this has wider implications than retrocession, but what do we surrender here? And I think this is a key to healing no matter what modality you use. If you go to a therapist, and I don't have a lot of faith in therapy, traditional talk therapy, other than just a place to talk to someone that has to listen because you're paying them. But if you want to get healing from therapy, if you want to get healing from EMDR, if you want healing from retrocession, if you want healing from any of the other therapies that exist, surrender is essential. and we're surrendering the story of what happened. I'm going to say it again. We are surrendering the story of what happened. And so, I'm going to use my personal experience as an example. And I've gone back and forth on talking about this because it's my past and it involves other people. But just know that the healing has made all these experiences worth it. I'm so grateful that I had these experiences, because without these experiences, I wouldn't have discovered retrocession and my life would be very different. So I want to start with that. But my core wound and the related wounds that kind of attached to it that I cleared up later on, but the core wound was, maybe I'll say one of the core wounds, but the main wound had to do with a church that I belonged to. And the absolute glee that I saw in people talking about others burning in hell for eternity. And I'm not making any kind of statement about theology or about hell even, but it wasn't hell. It was the glee that these people had in talking about it. And there's a specific scenario. I'm not going to go into it. Just know that. And I'm going to tell a bit of my story now because that gets at what I was releasing. So let's just put it this way. I heard a sermon. I must have been in a vulnerable place, and it changed my life forever. So first of all, how do I know it changed my life? I know because the moment I released the hold of that event on my life, it changed drastically. I'm not talking about, I feel a little bit better. I am talking about daily panic attacks to never having a panic attack again kind of change. So that tells me that it worked and that we found that thing. So this sermon happened. I see the glee of the person speaking. It fractured me. My experience letting go is first, my eyes were closed, but I just had this vision, internal sight. It's like imagination. And I saw that I'd been walking through life looking through a mirror or a glass that was shattered. So I literally, in my mind's eye, I saw the cracks, and I saw that the distortion of those cracks, because it was really cracked, that I wasn't seeing the world clearly for what it was. I was seeing the world through this lens. And I don't know that I have a deep way of explaining this. So I'm going to do my best. I've actually never tried to explain what the story was. So the story is that, well, there's a couple different ways to put it. So I'm actually just going to talk this out live. I haven't thought about this ahead of now. I really feel like doing this live is important. But the one possible story that came from that experience, that fracturing experience, was that God is hateful, that God wants people to suffer, that God chooses to allow people to suffer. So that's one possibility. I don't know that that's actually the story that I was attaching to this incident, because I really was an atheist. And I said it in a podcast, and if you're interested, let me know. And I can point you to that podcast. I don't remember which one it is off the top of my head, but I explain there. I was really an atheist. A lot of people will try to tell you atheists don't exist. Not true. I was an atheist. I can tell you, absolute atheist from that point on. So I don't think the story was that God is evil. I think the story was more that people are not what they appear to be. That there's a darkness inside of them. That the people around me may feel glee or joy at the thought of someone being tortured for eternity. What does that say about people? This is all the story. I'm not saying this right now, but what does that say about people? I can't trust people. I have to be fearful of people. I don't know what's hiding under the surface. What kind of hate? What kind of manipulation? I don't know what's hiding under the surface. And this is, again, speculation, but it feels right as I'm saying it. And so I had a deep caution as I walked through life from that age, whatever that was, 6 or 7 years old. Probably 6 or 7 years old. I had anxiety, essentially. I call it caution, but really it was anxiety. And it was, it got worse over time. but that anxiety about the world. And maybe even the deeper truth is I saw the world as a dangerous place. And when I say dangerous, I don't mean dangerous like I might fall and break my arm, or I might, someone might steal something from me. I mean, I had nightmares about the world ending. I had nightmares about nuclear war. I saw the world through the people in it. I saw the world as an inherently dangerous, I'll use the word demonic place, whatever that means to you. It is a scary place, or it was a scary place for me for most of my life up until just a few years ago. And I wasn't thinking this. I wasn't walking around as an adult, as an attorney a few years ago, thinking that consciously that people are evil and I need to watch out for them. I never really had a distrust of people so much. It's more what they're capable of doing in the world, capable of building nuclear weapons, capable of murdering each other, capable of doing all sorts of horrible things to each other. And so I had a fear. I had deep fear, deep-seated fear, not even conscious fear. A lot of times it manifested as fear about money, or fear about my business failing, or fear about this or that. But at its core was this fear that generated from this original incident. So that's the story. Now, it doesn't matter if that's actually the story. Let's call that the story. And what happened when I released that, when I surrendered that story, it got reframed. Now, the way we reframe in retrocession and other methodologies, it's not that we go into it and we think about it. I wasn't thinking about this scenario. I wasn't thinking that I needed to reframe. Like I said, I don't even know what the original story was exactly. I can only speculate about it. But there was a story surrounding this incident. And when I surrendered it, I saw that this was literally just a sermon that I heard as a child, period. There's nothing more. I'm not saying this is the experience everyone has. This is this particular incident, this particular event that I was able to release. It was simple. I just heard some words. They didn't affect reality. I heard some words, and they affected me, but they didn't change the nature of reality. Period. That's it. Now the story's gone. There's no story anymore. Essentially what I'm saying is there's no story. Another example. I have to change some details because confidentiality is so important to me in retrocession. But I had somebody tell me they had a relative die when they were young. And this person suffered from severe anxiety. They were shaking when I met them. And I understand that. I went through periods of time where I would shake uncontrollably, went through panic attacks. But this person went back through retrocession. We went to that event where they actually found out that the relative died. It wasn't actually the relative dying, it was them hearing about it, which is interesting. That's come up many times. That's usually where the trauma seems to implant itself based on my experience. But they heard about the person dying, and when they finally got to the release in retrocession, he stopped, eyes closed, really relaxed, and said, almost shaking his head, I believe, side to side, with a little bit of a perplexed look on his face, eyes were closed, and said, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. 2-3 times. And then I checked in with him. There's a process I used to see if somebody had really released, and he had. And from that day, he was changed, at least from what I've seen. I've not seen him recently, but from the times I saw him after that, he was a different human being. It was amazing. But he surrendered that story of why this relative died. And I'm not going to give additional details because it's going to be challenging to make up a version that isn't identifying. But he gave up his story. He surrendered his story. So this isn't just about retrocession. Yes, I'm talking about retrocession. That is what this page is about. But surrender is a key component of freedom. Freedom from the past, as we do in retrocession, as therapists try to do, as any healer tries to do. Freedom from the past. It's freedom from expectations right now. What is the story I'm telling about my mother's expectations for me? And I have a great relationship with my mother. I'm not saying this is just an example. What's the story that I have about my mother's expectations for me, and why I need to do what my mother wants to do, even though it's not right for me? What are the stories that I have about why I need to wear a particular style of clothing and spend money I don't have on clothing? What is the story that keeps me in a relationship that is painful all the time, or almost all the time? It's that simple. We're telling stories. We're believing those stories. And when we finally let go, when we drop the stories, we see things as they are, at least to the extent that we can, that is when healing happens. Surrender is healing. And so entirely absent from retrocession, doesn't even have to involve retrocession. Sit with it. Think about it. What are you holding on to? What stories are you holding on to? And maybe in the future, I'll put a video out where we work through one of those stories. It's a different process than retrocession, but it can be very powerful. And sometimes in retrocession, I use a process in the middle of retrocession. I don't know whether I consider it a part of retrocession, but I'll ask somebody a question. So, what do you want to say to your father? And then I'll ask it again. What do you want to say to your father after they give the answer? What do you want to say to your father? Or maybe, what does your 7-year-old self want to say to your father? That kind of thing. And I'll ask it over and over again. It can get annoying. When it starts to annoy the person, I know it's working, and it's terrible to go through yourself. In a way, it's terrible. It's powerful though, because that is where the story is reframed. And so I use that on tough cases when it seems like we're not breaking through and there's something. It's one of the methods I use when we're not breaking through. But that reframing of the story, breaking apart that story, is such an essential part of healing. Without it, we're not going to get healing. And that's one of the reasons that we can't heal if we're not willing to confront. There's certain modalities of supposed healing that I just do not believe work, because they're kind of like magic. You're just waving your hands over someone and saying you're healed. There may be examples where it seems like that's what's happening and someone does actually heal. But in my experience, there's always surrender happening. It's not the waving the hands over the person that's healing. It's not. It's not the words of some magical incantation. It's not what I'm saying in retrocession. I am not important to the process. Essential in a lot of cases, but I am not important in the process. All I am is a conduit for this process. I'm giving very simple instructions. The healing is always happening at the personal level. Always, always, always. Whether you're doing retrocession or traditional therapy or EMDR or some other alternative healing methodology, it is always the person being healed that is doing the healing. They're always the one healing themselves. All any of us can do is facilitate that process. So it's never about me. It's always about them. They are truly the healer. So thank you so much for joining me for this video. I'm committing right now on camera. I'm just going to start doing this. I'm going to speak from my heart. I've struggled getting videos put out. Obviously, you can look back. It's been a while since I put a video out. I struggle because I'm trying to portray something. I'm trying to, I believe so strongly that retrocession could help a lot of people that I'm trying to perfect my message. But you know what? I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to perfect my message. I am just going to let go. I am going to surrender. It's the reason I have to make this video. I surrender. The stories I tell myself about how retrocession works, why it works, who needs it, and how to present it to the world, I surrender that right now fully. So hold me accountable. If you watch this video and I don't put a video out and you want to see another one, contact me by DM on social media. Email me at chris@retrocession.org. retrocession.org. I think there's a link somewhere on YouTube. Find me on social media. Reach out. But I think you're going to see a lot more frequent posts from me. So this has been Chris with retrocession.org. Thank you so much for joining me.